Welcome to Talking Points. Today we're going to conclude our series on It's the Little Things, a compelling look as to why small things matter. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and we're going to get right into this. As we've been talking about, it's the small stuff that we just seem to we've even got books out that says don't sweat the small stuff. Obviously, small does matter. And so what we've learned thus far are some remarkable things about small stuff. For example, we've learned that people who despise the day of small things are easily discouraged and discourage others. We talked about this before, how that not to get twisted about the day where very little is manifested, but to understand that these days do occur. Understand we can't let the fast-paced zeitgeist that we live in to condition us to think that, well, I need to hurry up and get there. Sometimes we have to take the time to smell the roses along the way and to understand that there are going to be pitfalls and there are going to be setbacks, which are simply setups. And if we don't acknowledge that, it's going to be too easy to get discouraged. And as a result of that, we'll poison the mind of other people. Sort of what we saw as we talked about and as what you've read about when we have the 12 spies that went into the promised land. And when they went into the promised land, they were simply instructed by God to spy out the land, to go and see, what condition the land was in, what was there to offer, not to make an assessment of themselves, but to simply, do the reconnaissance, simply gather the intelligence and bring that back. What did they do? 10 of those spies came back and said, look, there are giants over there. The land is flowing with milk and honey, but look, we are as grasshoppers in their sight, and they had come to the conclusion that they couldn't do it because they saw themselves in a light that was negative. And in this sense, they were discouraged, and they discouraged others who, when we look at Joshua and Caleb, who made the assessment, their statement said, hey, look, we'd be more than able to do that. They did not look at their small number, but they looked at their big God. Many times we look at the small number and we forget about how big God really is. We learned the last time that our society has taught us to measure greatness by accumulation. We've just experienced the Olympics. What makes a nation great in the Olympics is how many gold medals that they have, or how many medals that they have, period. That's what people are striving for. They're striving for the gold. Am I saying there's anything wrong with that? No. The point that I'm making is that our society has taught us to measure greatness by accumulation. So we look for greatness first by what we see quantitatively instead of qualitatively. We gave a great outline the last time about the difference between quantitative and qualitative. And we also learned that those who place a high value on small efforts generally have a large vision. When you realize that the little things that you are contributing today, are going to pay off big after a while, you have a large vision. And so you're patient and you're able to ride the storm of little efforts. Why? Because your big vision says my small contributions are going to pay off after a while. Well, here's a quote by Matt Bevan, and it says, while it may seem small, the ripple effect of small things is extraordinary. While it may seem small, the ripple effect of small things is extraordinary. But when we think about small things, let's look at science. The science of small things. And one of the most fascinating pieces of technology today is nanotechnology. Well, what is the meaning of nanotechnology? It is the manipulation of materials on an atomic or molecular scale, especially to build microscopic devices such as robots, placing atoms as though they were bricks. Nanotechnology will give us complete control over the structure of matter, allowing us to build any substance or structure permitted by the laws of nature. That's a big deal today, nanotechnology. And it is still unfolding, it's still developing, but it's about the science of small things. It's about those little bitty small things that are able to do something big in a great way. And so we need to pay attention to the small stuff. If the world of science and technology is regarding the science of small stuff, then we need to think about it. Now, a lot of you are probably that are watching may remember when the first cellular phone came out, it was like a big brick that you had in your hand. It was really heavy. Now we got smartphones that are not just able, they're not like the old phones that, that was on what you would call, what's that word? Linear. But there's another word for it. It'll come to me. But the idea is that the technology that phones are using today is a whole lot different than the phones of before. We live in a digital age. Back then it was not a digital age. And so the bottom line is now what used to be a whole side of a room to be a computer, now you can have the computer in the size of your hand. Why? That is the science of small things, how small things matter in the world of technology. People are regarding small things as a way of life, a norm, as it were, being able to work at things at the atomic level, and that's or molecular level. All that's important. The science of small things. We see the science of small things, and now in DNA, especially in forensic science. In forensic science, there was a time that they did not regard DNA. That was not even on the playing field, but now in the science of small things, forensic evidence can look at, the difference between one fingerprint or the one molecular print of one individual and another molecular imprint of another individual, and they can say this was a person that was present, or whatever the case it might be. There are things we can learn. So when we talk about DNA, that's talk about the science of small things that can only be what? Looked at, regarded, and measured by what? A microscope. And so science of small things is a way of really appreciating the stuff that is not necessarily naked to the eye, but it does have an impact. We could talk about other types of things in life where small things matter that we come in contact with every day. We could talk about the Grand Canyon, or we could talk about these caverns where you see these little drops of water that over time are able to produce, a sizable event. Or we can talk about, we could talk about critical mass, where you take the neutron beam and you put it on that atom, and right before it explodes, what does it do? It diminishes in size. Many times we don't understand that sometime before we can explode, sometime before we can explode, what do? We blow up, as it were, or we come out in a higher manifestation. Now, here's one. Here's one for you. Now, you know the story about Gideon. Now, those of you that don't know your Bible stories or just becoming acquainted with the Word of God, there's a story about this guy named Gideon. Now, here at Gideon, and here God was wanting to give Gideon and his army the victory. But in order to have a victory, first of all, you got to assess who your enemy is, and you need to assess your resources, and you need to assess what you would call your inventory, as it were, and you need to assess what kind of enemy is coming at you. They had thousands of people, a lot more than what they had. And yet when they got this assessment, God tells them, he tells Gideon, what I want you to do is to tell everybody that's not ready to fight, basically to, you can go home. And so after that happened, what do we see? A lot of people left. Wait a minute now. But the situation, the challenge in front of them had not diminished in size. They still had thousands of people against them. Now they have smaller numbers to work with. And so God basically told Gideon, now I want you to take these that you got left, and I want you to put them to the test. I want you to send these people down to this to the brook, as it were, and have them to refresh themselves. And those who lap water, those who refresh themselves and look both ways, you set them off to the side. Those who are not observant of others around you, then you set them to the side. Now, when that shakes out, what do you got? You're down. Now Gideon is down to 300. Yet the numbers that are against him had not changed. He has smaller numbers to work with. He has a smaller amount but God says, look, I'm going to work with this smallness here. I'm going to work with this small number of people. Similar to what we see when that neutron beam is put on that atom. Before it explodes, it diminishes in size. And many times we have these kind of experiences in life to where, we lose members to our church, or we've had a dip in the market, or our business, seems to be going awry. But the thing of it is not to, be discouraged by that which has gone awry or that which is diminished, but understand that in the science of small things, especially when it comes to the hand of God, God many times is at work when things are diminishing. Here's a fact. Sometimes we have to be minused before we can be plussed. And so are we able to accept, and are we able to embrace, are we able to basically acknowledge the fact that there are going to be dips and there are going to be valleys before you ever get to the mountain? There's going to be valleys to go along with the mountains that we have to peak, or the mountains that we have to climb. And so Gideon now has 300 people. Problem is not going away. Yet when you begin to look at it through the eyes of numbers, through the eyes of accumulation, you will conclude, I can't handle this. This is too much. But the fact of the matter was that this 300, along with their obedience and along with their faith in God, was just enough in the recipe for God to work with. And what happened? He had great success with what they had available and what they placed in the hands of God. These are just some of the stories, one of the stories rather, from the Bible, but there are other stories in the Bible that helps us to appreciate the power of small, or the power of little things. In fact, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 30, verses 24 through 28, it says, 4 things on the earth are small, yet they are exceedingly wise. The ants are a people without strength, yet they provide their food in the summer. The Badgers are a people without power, yet they make their homes in the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet all of them march in rank. The lizard can be grasped in the hand, yet it is found in kings' palaces. The power of small things. What does it say here? There are 4 things on earth that are small, yet they are exceedingly wise. Wisdom in the small stuff. And let me say, there is wisdom when you can regard and appreciate small things. Here you got the example from the book of Proverbs, chapter 30, 24 through 28. Well, this is not the only thing that we can find in the Bible that gives us an insight and appreciation for the power of little things. In fact, in the book of James, chapter 3, verses 3 through 6, it gives a description of something little but also very powerful. If we put bits in the mouth of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also is the tongue. It's a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body and sets on fire the cycle of nature and is itself set on fire by hell. So here you find in the book of James a description about the power of little things. How you take that bit and you put it in the horse's mouth and the horse will obey you. Or this huge cruise liner, as it were, or battleship is guided by a very small rudder. Even our tongue is one of those little members in our body that can really shake things up, that can really get us in trouble, or it can really be used as a powerful tool when it comes to the things of God. The power of little things we can see right there. But the Bible has other things to tell us about the power of little things. God's power in the small. And here I want to talk about Samson. Now, we heard so much about Samson in Sunday school and Bible stories and stuff like that. We probably read about it. We know that Samson, and we know about Delilah, and we know about Samson's strength was found in his hair. But let's look at some of the things we can learn about the power of small things. In Judges chapter 15, verses 14 through 16, it says this: When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed on him, and the ropes were on his arms became like flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached down and took it, and with it he killed 1,000 men. And Samson said, quote unquote, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Notice that jawbone was a very small thing in the hands of a man of faith when you have the God of power working with the man or woman of faith. Are you a man or woman of faith? Then the truth is that God can take the little that you have to offer and cause a huge impact. Here we find Samson was able to do something with simply the jawbone of a donkey, yet he was able to slay 1,000 men. We can also go to the book of Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 through 29. And here we see there's power in the small or power in the insignificant that may be regarded by others. And it says here, but God chose what is foolish in the world to what? Shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. So now we don't have an excuse for small stuff. God uses what is estimated by others as foolish, and he does that to shame those who are wise. And those things that are weak, those very weak instruments, as it were, to shame those who are strong, the jawbone of a donkey, or those who are despised and low in the estimation of others. Even when it comes to people groups, when you have a people that might be despised or looked upon very negatively, God will use those same kind of people to bring about the kind of exploits in the world. To do what? To reduce to nothing things that are, that no one might boast in the presence of God. God's power can be seen in these small or insignificant things that he chooses to use, that he can retain his glory. Well, there are other things about God's power in the small, and we can't forget about this one, the widow's pot of oil. And this goes back to the 2 Kings chapter 4, 1 through 7, where we find there's a story of Elisha and this woman. And in this illustration, it's showing how God can provide. It's shown in the case of this poor widow. Now, this woman was in great poverty, and her creditors were about to take her 2 sons as payment for a debt. She appealed to Elijah for help, or Elisha in this case for help. Elisha asked, "What do you have in your house?" Her answer was, "Nothing really except a small pot of oil." Elisha instructed her to get all the empty vessels you can. Go to your neighbors and borrow all you can. And when all these empty vessels were assembled, the widow was told to start pouring out of her meager supply into the vessels she had obtained. And suddenly she realized that her meager supply filled all the pots. Then she sold the oil and paid her debt. The point is here, the Lord used what she had available. God's power made a small thing very valuable, and she was able to save her 2 sons. Now that's the story. But God used what she had available. The question is, what do you have to avail yourself to the Lord? What little bit do you have to contribute? The little bit that you got is important, and God can use it. Even if you see yourself as little in God's eyes, know that if you see yourself little in God's eyes, God sees your little big in his arms. The Lord used what she had available. God's power made a small thing very valuable, and in this case, she was able to save her family. Well, as we wrap things up, as we wrap this series up, we can't forget about God's power seen in a little boy's lunch. Now, y'all know the story that Jesus had told his disciples to go what? Go and feed these hungry folk that have been following us. And he says, they said, we don't even have enough to meet such a mass of people, but go and find what you got. And all they were able to find was 2 little fish and 5 loaves of bread. 2 fishes and little 5 barley loaves. A little boy's lunch that fed 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. So there was a lot of people that were supplied by that which was very small. Don't disregard the little bit that you have to offer in God's hand, because the little bit that you have to offer in God's hand is something great when God gets his hand on it. God rewards those who are faithful in little stuff. In fact, the Bible tells us if you're faithful in a few things, he'll make you what? Ruler over many. Sometimes we want to get to the platform without the process. It's the little stuff that we need to be faithful in that God rewards us with a platform later. God rewards those who are faithful in little stuff. If I can trust you with the little things, I don't have to worry about you with the big stuff. So little stuff does have a power in God, the way God estimates value. And we must never, ever forget the still small voice that God speaks in our heart. Sometimes it's not always the thunder and lightning. Sometimes it's not the huge aha moment or revelation. It's simply a still small voice that we know is a very great God. Well, I trust that you've been blessed by this series that we've done on the It's the Little Things. We have been looking at a compelling reason why small things matter. We've covered a lot of territory, but now it's for you. Think about the little things that you can contribute. Think about the little things that you've seen at work that really made a huge impact. If it matters then, it matters now. Don't always value things based upon the amount that you accumulate to assess greatness. But it's the qualitative stuff that's equally important, and in some cases even better than the quantitative aspects of life. God is looking for people who can place value on small things, small efforts that he can reward with greatness when that time comes and when that time is assigned to your life. We will talk to you again here on Talking Points as we deal with something brand new, something relevant coming very soon. We'll see you next time.